Folks, this is Tom Opry, your host to the podcast where we ask the tough questions regarding man's impact on the world's wildlife. Raw and unfiltered, we strive to help you fully understand the real issues at hand. Our goal, ensuring the world's wildlife and wildlife habitat exists forever. Stay tuned for another edition of Shepherds of the Wild.
So I kind of want to get into the meat of what we're talking about. Tell us who you are, and tell us about the fact that you're executive director of this organization you are, with the trees and stuff, and just kind of explain to us your background.
Okay. I am a land agent, chartered surveyor, a landowner, and I am the chairman of the conservation charity Trees for Life.
And so what is the Trees for Life? What do you guys do?
Trees for Life is a charity which is all about promotion of the restoration of the Caledonian pine woods and more recently the rewilding movement.
So what is the rewilding movement? I mean, what is the purpose of this thing?
So there are different extremes to what rewilding is, means different things to different people, but ultimately it's the restoration of natural processes, restoring of ground, and the reduction of human management and interaction with what's going on the land.
So what, in essence, are you guys really doing? I mean, as far as the physical thing, I mean, what was the land like before you started this movement? What propagated the movement? And then kind of like, physically what was going on? Explain to us.
So the founder of Trees for Life recognised the depleted natural resources that we were seeing in this part of the world, in the Scottish Highlands, and set about making a commitment to restore the Highlands to what he felt it should be. And he did that really in two ways. One was woodland creation. Second is protection of vulnerable trees. And then increasingly things like removing any self-set regeneration of non-native species.
Okay. So basically, what do you guys do? I mean, what physically are you guys doing out here?
Trees for Life does a number of different things in today's climate. The first thing is we promote the danger that we're all in, essentially recognising the shortfalls of human management in the Scottish Highlands and advocating change. We do that by way of promoting our cause, shining a light on the negative elements of what we see around us. And we achieve it through woodland creation. We grow our own trees, native species, where we plant them on our own ground and we plant them on other people's ground, supplying woodland creation schemes elsewhere. We remove non-native species. We use volunteers. We've got this amazing network of volunteers who've worked with us over the last few decades to come and give their time and passion to helping us achieve our aims. And most recently, we're in the final throes of creating a new rewilding centre, which will be a visitor experience in Glenmorrison, which we hope will be a sort of exemplar tourist attraction where people will come and learn about rewilding and what Trees for Life does.
So you mentioned something about negative management practices. Can you explain to me what are negative management practices? What is their history? What are they today, and how does that affect the landscape?
I think when it comes to the human species, we learn as we go. And as we sit here today, we probably think we have most of the answers. 100 years from now, we'll probably realise we're making some terrible mistakes. Just as we sit here now, looking back on what we've done and the outcome of it, it's clear we've made some pretty fundamental errors of judgment along the way. So as an example, woodland clearance for resources, necessary facet of human evolution. We needed wood. We've consumed it. We've consumed it to beyond the point where it can regenerate itself. So we need to fix that. We've introduced other.
But let me stop for 1 second there. But what you're talking about is, just so I understand this, you're talking about the removal of forest trees for, we're talking back over the millennia, 100,000 years, 1,000 years ago to build ships and whatever else. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, that's where it starts. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's
so
exactly. Could
you explain to me what that removal, when it occurred, and kind of give us an idea, just for perspective?
Sure. So in terms of, Scotland was once almost completely covered in trees. It was, I believe, 90-something% afforested. That figure today, I believe, is 18%. We are we've consumed that in a number of different ways. One is for resources, timber for resources. The second is clearance for farming practices. So we've introduced artificial grazing in the form of sheep, cattle, and we've colonized land for farmland, converted it from natural woodland into agricultural land, again to produce resources for us. And over time, we've continued to harvest these resources, deplete them, and we now have an environment locally which is not representative of what it should be. It's depleted. It's lacking huge amounts of biodiversity that should be there. We've taken too much, and we need to fix it.
So just sticking on the forestry stuff, back wasn't it the late 1980s or 1990s that the government here actually instituted these schemes to plant trees in order to provide for raw materials, natural resource raw materials and stuff? Wasn't that a political scheme that they did? And that's something now 20, 30 years later they've backed off. Is that correct?
That's correct. So starting as early as the 70s, the government incentivized woodland creation on a large scale in uncultivated parts of the highlands. So planting on peat bogs, open hills, open moor, and promoted commercial species, fast-growing conifers that are well suited to growing in this environment, principally Sitka spruce. And it was a fast growth area. Lots of people invested in it, and we've planted huge tracts of land which current thinking dictates we shouldn't have planted on at all. So we now have these large areas of productive woodland, which, whilst from a biodiversity perspective they're not good, they do actually provide they underwrite an industry in the form of the British timber industry, which relies on these fast-growing non-native timber species, and they grow quite successfully here. So whilst you'll find some people say Sitka spruce, for example, are bad, they offer no sustenance to nature, there is a flip side, which is that we humans make a living from and everything in balance, I guess. We have to get to a stage where I would certainly not advocate the loss of an industry. I think if it's sustainable, I'm all for it. So we need to manage restoring the bits that we shouldn't have planted, whether we can plant them with something else or they need to be unplanted, figure that out. And if there are areas that are well suited to growing commercially productive timber, maybe we can continue to do that, but in a regulated, cohesive way.
Okay. Just to stick on the timber stuff, the non-native Sitka spruce. I mean, I'm hearing stories of plowing up the peatlands and the heather in order to plant the non-native species. Why does it happen like that? I mean, why are we planting those things the way they do it? And kind of just help me understand, because I'm thinking about it as a wildlife habitat, is that, we end up with a monoculture. And that's not always, for the native plants that are here, and of course we have in North America, that doesn't always work really well. Sometimes doesn't work at all. So what is your experience on this, and why is that practice occurring?
So I think in, again, 70s, 80s, 90s, we were able to plant trees within some reason, more or less anywhere, excluding wetlands, basically, so open bog. As thinking's evolved, we've realised we've understood carbon sequestration far better, and we understand now that peatland is the greatest sequestration vessel for carbon. And actually planting woodland on peatland, deep peat, is counterproductive. It actually releases more carbon than it sequesters. So it is true that we've planted and we continue to plant in some places where the peat is sensitive. But as an industry, the Scottish Government, the Forestry Commission, regulate where we now plant trees, and they do actually control and restrict the planting on deep peat. So you can't just plant a tree wherever you want now. It has to be signed off as an effective area. And if it is deep peat, if it's class 1 peat, you probably won't be allowed to plant on it. So we have kind of got our affairs in order to that extent.
One of the terminology I've heard from some of the people on the land here is talking about this carbon gold rush, and the fact that there's a change of ownership based by multinational corporations, high net worth individuals that are trying to reduce their quote unquote carbon footprint. And so that entails getting rid of whatever the previous use of it. In many cases, it's a sporting estate. And of course, I'm talking to landowners that are saying, hey, we have to contemplate this. We have to contemplate because financially, I mean, these things are not money makers from what I'm hearing. What are your thoughts on this carbon gold rush and planting? I talked to Dr. Alison Hester over in Aberdeen, and she's done some research that says, Sitka spruce really don't sequester the carbon compared to the peat, as you mentioned earlier. So yet we're still taking viable lands, and we're plowing up peat and heather and putting Sitka spruce in them because these corporations want to reduce their carbon footprint in theory. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, as a species, we're evolving and we're realizing the damage we've done. In terms of carbon, growing realization that that's what we have to fix. It's the biggest tool we have at our disposal is to sequester more carbon. What the government did to try and promote interest and enterprise, if I can call it that, in carbon is to incentivize the exploration of woodland creation. But more than that, they've advocated the creation of something called natural capital, which is a base that's still evolving and growing. But ultimately, what it's led to is third-party companies, large corporations typically, who will enter the market quite soon, who want to offset their carbon footprint. And they want to do it in a way that is connected to their shareholders, to their board, and to their corporate social responsibility. So they want to secure projects which have a really positive impact overall. That they might be landscape scale, they might just be that it's the right sort of restoration of the right place. And what we're seeing is those corporates entering the market early, if you like, and they're driving the property market at the moment in terms of who's buying land. They are fundamentally changing the landscape from a highly typically sporting purpose of ownership of a Highland sporting estate to now the decarbonising of the economy and the wider rewilding movement being key drivers. They value the land in a completely different way than the traditional method of valuation, which comes down to the sort of sporting elements you can yield from a piece of ground. It now comes down to the potentially the value of the carbon trading units you can extract or generate from a piece of ground. So it's no one's fault. It's humans doing what humans do, which is adapting, and it's entrepreneurs doing what entrepreneurs do, which is recognizing opportunities. They are creating wealth in new places by fundamentally changing the land use of those areas. What you asked me what I think about it. I think it's suboptimal. I think the outcome is not great because, as I said, the big corporates will enter the market. They will buy their carbon or create their carbon and then exit the market again quite quickly thereafter. And what they'll leave us with is uncertain. Will it be a very large piece of woodland that is unmanageable or that one can't touch? Will they have sterilised any ground? Too early to say, really. What it does do for anyone who has aspirations of owning land is it pushes it arguably just slightly further. If you advocate changing of land use objectives away from sporting enterprises, which we know a lot of people do, you might look on it very positively in that it's changing. It's meaning that if I had a big tract of the Highlands where it's got deer and grouse and salmon and things on it, the person who buys that land might not be somebody who wants to enjoy hunting or fishing or shooting. It might be somebody who is doing it as an investment to recover carbon, in which case it achieves a different kind of outcome. So it's a really difficult thing to levy a judgment against. It's happening. It's driving the market. There's a lot going on. I suspect the outcome will have some pretty negative downsides, but they haven't fully materialised yet. So probably kind of remains to be seen. Give it a few years and we'll find out.
One of the things that in North America that I recognize is that we have this conservation ethos where we value wildlife, we value the fisheries, and if you do something to eradicate it, it pisses a lot of people off. Not only the sportsmen, but even the non-sportsmen, because everybody values seeing wildlife. They want to truly see wildlife in their backyards and while they drive to work and whatnot. But if you get into a model that removes people from the land, because an estate may employ 6, 8, 10, 12 people. It may involve multiple families and multiple estates in a given glen or area. Obviously, those kids go to the schools. They use the local stores and restaurants and whatnot. If you put in these forested areas, and they're, of course you have a couple people managing them, but it really doesn't take near the amount of manpower that a grouse moor takes by any means. What happens to the people, and what happens, because what we see, we've got people out there interacting with it, and because they take care of it, they like it, they take care of it, they're out there involved in it. What happens to these people when you see these types of land use changes, these wholesale changes very quickly?
I think, again, you'll see an evolution of communities where we have a traditional model, which everyone understands and lives within at the moment and recognises there are jobs on X and Y estate. I think there will always be jobs on X and Y estate, but they'll be different. I think it might be a very bad outcome if corporates owned everything and private people or communities or local groups didn't own anything at all. Then I think there's a risk we lose that sustainability of living and working in an area. But I think, again, the world is evolving. People want different things. We're more, the population as a whole is more informed, is hopefully, I believe, heading in a direction of being more connected to the environment and wanting to understand the world they live in a bit better and give back slightly. I think it's an age thing at the moment. When you're young, you maybe don't pay so much attention. As you get older, like I am, you start to think more about, what can I do to fix this? So I believe that there will be jobs, because there will be, if we do the right things, more people will want to come and see the right things, experience the right things, and hopefully create more enterprise in investment in holidays and rural jobs that maybe don't follow the traditional standards of normal. Having said all that, I also think it's vitally important we preserve some tradition too. I mean, it's ultimately what we are. It defines us to an extent. That notion of the Highland estate with gamekeepers doing their thing. I mean, that's amazing. I've grown up in that. I would hate to lose that altogether. I just think the world changes and we'll adapt.
So what happens to the wildlife, though? I mean, what you're painting a picture here is that there isn't really no management of wildlife on the land. It's letting Mother Nature take over with man's input. Man's creating these building blocks, and then it's David Balhari said to me, he's like, hey, these keepers and these gillies and these stalkers, they don't know it, but they're already been removed from the land. And that there's going to be, international billionaires that come in and buy things and have the money to build the infrastructure for tourism. Where I live in Montana, next to Glacier National Park, I've got grizzly bears and wolves and elk and bighorn sheep and mountain goats. These beautiful mountains. We have forests and we have pristine streams with great fishing and all that stuff. And people come from all over the world to see that stuff. But, if these monocultures are out here and there isn't any, I've driven across this country multiple times, east to west, and until this trip hadn't seen but 3 deer. And, it's kind of the iconic stag is the, obviously is kind of the mantra or mascot of this country. It's a major symbol. What's going to happen to the wildlife if, in fact, we change our society like you're explaining?
I think it's all about biodiversity. Biodiversity underpins wildlife, and at the moment we don't have a huge amount of biodiversity. We do in certain managed landscapes. We have incredible amounts of one species, another species, a group of species, but we might have missing bits. The whole point of restoring the natural biodiversity is that we give a habitat to more and more wildlife. I accept that there are some people who want to see change in an evangelical way, and that there is a very prescribed system for humans step back, let nature take it back, take control, do its own thing. I respect that. I'm not in that place. I'm somewhere in between. We've messed this up. We have done a huge amount to change, to manipulate what's going on. We have to keep our hand in it until maybe the time will come where we can take that step back and think, right, well, we've restored enough of the natural process. Let's leave it to get on with it. I don't know if that ever comes, but I believe there's a place for humans, because we are the apex species. We're going to have to keep our hands in and continue to steer the biodiversity recovery and make land use decisions all of the time. I think the secret comes into cohesive things in certain areas. So if one area, it's like farming. In a perfect world, whatever you grow best in this county, you'd all grow that because that's what you grow best. Instead, what you see is everyone grows a little bit of everything because that's how you protect yourself from a financial perspective. In a way, if this place was the best place in the world, in the country to grow deer, say, we would be a deer reserve. And somewhere else, which might be the best place in the world to have lynx and something else, let them do it there. But whether we've got enough room to do that, I don't know. We're a tiny country. It remains to be seen. But I find it exciting, the idea that at the moment I could go walk in the forest and I might see 20 species. I'd like to be able to go and walk in that forest and maybe see 30 species or 100 species, whatever it might be. And more important than all of that, I just want us to be, at the moment we're on a deteriorating path. We need to arrest that, so when I fall off my perch, the kids know that things are coming back, and we, as a sort of age structure of our humankind, we recognised our mistakes, we tried to fix it. Maybe we'll get it wrong, as I said earlier. In 100 years' time, maybe it'll judge us unkindly and say, why on earth were you trying to reintroduce beavers and lynx and things like that? It was a huge mistake. Boar are here in big numbers. Why weren't you doing more to stop that? These are things that only the fullness of time will judge, and I'm not somebody who would profess to have all the answers.
So talk to me a little bit about these species. We've talked about moose, we've talked about bears and wolves and beavers and all that stuff. Tell me, why do we want to have this biodiversity? What is this biodiversity? What are these animals here? And what do you think the outcomes are going to be?
So it is a fact that we have lost certain species from our country over decades, centuries. It's also a fact that everything existed before we were around in a rather better way than it does now. I'm not clever enough to be able to take you through each stage-by-stage decision in each thing. All I can do is say, I recognise that we are missing some things on an environmental perspective. Anything which can improve our environment, can address the frankly disastrous mess we're in terms of where we're all going, global warming and the rest of it. So beavers, for example, managing flooding. I know in my heart I want beavers here. I know they improve the habitat that they're on. I know that they, to some people, are a risk. I'm okay with that. I'm there. It's the right thing to do. Lynx, the same to some extent, just to install another predator to manage some prey species a bit better, to take the pressure off humans having to use bullets to control things. There's always probably going to be a place for that, but let nature be involved. And then the final part of it is animal behavior will evolve. It has evolved into what we currently experience it to be, where, the deer, you're saying you haven't seen many deer, because they're probably all piled into forestry holding tight where they're safe. We need to change that. We need to introduce species that will get them moving again, reintroduce that inbuilt sense of danger when they're in thick cover, that's where predators might be, and they might want to be in less sparsely covered areas, move around a bit more, be more transient. So just fundamentally, to be able to have the chance of experiencing more that is not here at the moment. I also run a tourist business. I recognise that I think if there were these missing species here, more people would be excited to come and see them. You guys know that better than anyone from what's happened in Yellowstone and other places. These are interesting things to see, really interesting. And obviously this is a fraction of the size, but getting towards that to create a place of interest. At the moment in Scotland, there's loads of things to go and look at and to observe and then to just move on. We want to make this place somewhere where people want to come and to be immersed in it, to stay here for a while, to explore different facets of this area. And I think, in my opinion, the wildlife that you might be able to see underpins that potentially. So I think there are a number of species which we talk about all the time, about reintroduction. I'm not 100% there with all of them. There are some which would like to eat me. I'm not ready for them just yet. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I accept if I want some species back and not others, that might be a problem. Let's talk about it. That's the thing, is we should be able to discuss these things in an open, sensible, calm way without all getting furious and throwing things at each other, which is unfortunately what we tend to do. I've just tried to register this area as as a licensed area for beaver translocation. So beavers where they're on other watercourses such as Tayside, where they're causing problems for farmers. I've tried to register this area as a place where when those beavers are captured, they could be translocated here, released where the habitat can accommodate them up to a certain amount, and then leave them to it, see what happens. Unfortunately, the consultation process has gone badly. There's a lot of opposition. There are a lot of people who think this is a bad idea. I'm not sure they've fully articulated some of their concerns, and I'm not sure if I completely accept some of their rationale for not wanting beavers, but I have to respect them. And the big problem is not having the opportunity to have dialogue about it in a calm way. Just whenever someone like me brings an idea along, it causes trouble, and people tend to push back slightly.
You know, you talked about not ready to have certain creatures. We talked a little earlier about grizzly bears, and we have lots of extra grizzly bears in Montana that we could definitely bring to Scotland.
Yeah.
But what that brings me to the point is that having that biodiversity makes for a much more healthier planet. Much better ecosystems. But one of the things that we've seen is that because there are so many of us humans on the landscape, we still have to manage the overall ecosystem, and we have to manage it in a way that allows for us to take into account not only the prey species, so the animals that are maybe hunted by hunters, but also those predators, because there's lots of science, ample science that says, hey, if you put a whole bunch of prey species out there and then you put in a few predators, the predator population is going to ramp right up with the prey species, and eventually, you're going to have some sort of difficulty there, in so much as that you've got humans in that equation. So you're going to have that human-wildlife conflict. So if in fact Scotland were to have lynx, were to have like the pine marten here, which feeds very well on ground nesting birds. Is there a way to manage these ecosystems, and who manages these things too? Because in the United States, each state has a fish and game commission and has a biologist and has game wardens, and we have this infrastructure to monitor, to protect and conserve it through science, utilizing science to make decisions. Of course, politics always rears its ugly head and everything, but I don't really see that here, because the only people I see on the ground that are actively doing anything, obviously for the benefit of their industries, are the sporting side of things. We have the rewilding side where we want to put trees in, we want to bring some more diversity by bringing other plants and animal species into these environments. But who really is going to be out there making decisions every day? Okay, we have too many lynx in this area, we have too many pine marten, we no longer have any ground nesting capercaillie, which is now going to go extinct. And some people are like, yeah, well, whatever, they already went extinct, let's do it again. Okay, if that's a societal thing. But if we want to have this biodiversity, why would we want anything to go extinct? So I guess my question is who is going to be who are the people that are actually going to be on the land that are going to manage these ecosystems?
So it's a really good question. I mean, if I could separate deer out for a second, because they're slightly different. At the moment, I, as a landowner, have autonomy to manage creatures on my property with autonomy, provided it's within the law. I don't have to answer to anyone. I don't have to give records or annual returns unless it's a game thing which is managed. So salmon and deer are the two exceptions to that rule. Deer are, I'm still entitled to manage the deer on my property in any way I see fit, to a point. There is a point at which I could lose that autonomy. There's a long process to go through. Deer are managed through regional organizations called deer management groups, which are defined by geography. But they're entirely collaborative and voluntary, essentially. They're voluntary to a point. Again, you can cross the line and then lose that autonomy. The government can step in and take control measures where designated sites are under pressure. So in answer to your question, who's going to manage that? At the moment, well, if you use beavers as an example, we have beavers in this area already, escapes from privately held collections, which have colonized the local river. And a landowner recently shot 3 of them, as she was entirely within their rights to do, but which is a bitter blow to someone like me who's 2 miles upstream, who's trying very hard to be able to bring beavers to this area. So it's a fundamental problem which we have to overcome. there's a line to walk again, because at the moment, if you have autonomy, if I have autonomy to do something, that whatever I want to do, and you come and try and take that from me, that's a problem. So I need to understand why you want to take it from me. I need to understand what the objectives are. What are we trying to achieve? So until we do that, we can't really build a framework around managing it, because what are we trying to achieve? I know what I want to do, but no one cares. That's just me. And maybe I would find by coincidence I'm aligned with my neighbour, my next neighbour, my next neighbour. That's when things start to get interesting. So if you take Trees for Life, they've introduced the African Highlands concept in partnership with Rewilding Europe, and this is a landscape scale attempt to bring together a cluster of private owners as one, to recognising completely different land use objectives on their own respective properties, but recognising a desire amongst those owners to do something. I don't want to say the word better. I mean, in my opinion, it is better, but that's not necessarily what they would say. Working together collaboratively with other landowners to achieve something bigger than just on my property. So I throw my few hundred, couple of thousand acres in, it's in. But on my own, I can only do so much. If I go in as part of something much bigger, then we're really talking. We can achieve something cool.
It's interesting you say that, because I get the question would be, like in Namibia, I've been down there where they've taken some of these 50, 100,000 acre ranches, and they've all come together and put a fence around 1.5 million acres and create a conservancy that all had similar management goals, even though you have multiple landowners. Are you talking about something like that here in Scotland, or are you talking about as far as adjacent landowners coming up and managing a glen, an ecosystem, multiple glens that are all in that area? Or are we talking about a theory of thought that like-minded people across the spectrum, across great distances, in this country are saying, okay, well, I believe in this, but Johnny doesn't believe in it next door, and Bob way over there, or Stuart, he believes in it, but way over there in Inverness, this guy believes in it, but they're not connected.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems we run into in North America. And we've seen this specifically in the eastern United States, where more and more large tracts of land are being developed. And so that land is being split up more and more, and it's having a real adverse effect on things like our wild turkey populations. You can't manage these areas effectively once you divide them all up. So you already have all this division. You're talking about making this coming back on there, but is it something of adjacent landowners, or is it just this common thought process and beliefs between like-minded landowners?
It's difficult to answer, but I actually think it's kind of both. In that, so we're tiny, as you know, as a country, and I think we're going to be limited by cohesive physical features. So African Highlands is where it is because we wanted to find collectively a corridor between the East Coast and the West Coast, where we could act in a cohesive manner as one. There'd be no point, for example, trying to afforest an arable farm in one of the low-lying counties on the east coast of Scotland. It would be crazy because we need to produce food to sustain us. So, but buying into that approach, recognizing the biodiversity gains that we can all have, is the common thread that would bind us all together. But I think when it comes to physically delivering the biodiversity, my expectation is you would have regional areas with specific focuses and priorities. So it's a point you mentioned Kapakele, where there are still strongholds, wrong word. I mean, there's still clinging on groups of Kappa in the Cairngorms, Easter Ross. Those sorts of places might get bigger and bigger with a view to managing, with the objective of bringing, creating habitat better to bring them back. Managing predators on a cohesive basis would be a huge step forward. I mean, that I've never known any two estates work together. I'm sure there are examples, but where we work together to achieve a cull of foxes, for example. Everyone just shoots a fox or manages foxes, done. I catch crows, with Larsen traps every spring, or try to, just because to me there are huge populations of corvids which are outperforming everything else because they're so good at it. They're ideally suited to this habitat and what we've created. So we need to fix that or manage it. Give other things a chance to thrive. So I think regionally, we'll do things with specific objectives in it, but then as a whole, the recognition that we just can't go on as we are. So if you own an arable farm in Angus or Perthshire or whatever, you might try and make some changes to address the wider environmental and nature benefits, but recognizing you're not going to plant your grade 2 field in birch trees, because that would be mad.
Who pays for all this?
So government policy essentially is driven by initially incentive in the form of finance, or latterly with penalties if you don't do something.
Oh, this is awesome. This is cool. I like this. It's a great conversation.
Cool.
We could talk for hours, I think.
Yeah, it's just have to bang on for ages about.
Kick us out.
No,
I mean, if you need to go do the Halloween thing.
No, it's fine. They've gone. It's cool. You got me out of that one. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. All right. As long as you're happy.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Watching my children tell shit jokes.
Yeah. All right. So, who pays for this?
Government policy essentially drives change, and it does it initially through finance. So they reward positive change in the direction of travel they want to go, or latterly they'll penalise. So they'll punish you if you don't go forward with fines or removal of rights, powers. Agricultural subsidy is one of the main underwriters of that. So when the government wants to go in a particular direction, they offer grants, support payment, any kind of artificial support to move in that distance until they achieve a particular outcome, and then they pivot, do something different. So that drives macro change. In terms of wider change, ultimately, it's incumbent on anyone who owns property to act responsibly. It feels and looks like there is a form of judgment coming, which will be levied, I don't know by whom, but against landowners. Landowners, rightly or wrongly, whatever your outlook is, we're considered as the enemy by a lot of people. The reasons for that are extremely complex. People are going to judge the way land is managed in a positive or negative way, and they do that based on a series of indicators that I don't know what they are. To different people, they might be different things. To me, they would be that you're doing all the right things from an environmental perspective, and that you're doing what you can to underwrite a sustainable community. That's involved for me is trying to create jobs, maintain jobs, and trying to generate investment in development, new infrastructure, new enterprises, things like that. So private finance will essentially drive that. When it comes to this particular part of the world, we're quite remote. We don't have any particular industries, certainly not mechanized ones anymore. Forestry is highly specialized. Tourism is the thing. Tourism, and to a lesser extent renewable energy. Tourism will drive or will underwrite this change in this area, because if what I imagine in my head comes to pass, and we collectively are successful in delivering it, or delivering some of it, part of it, all of it, more people will want to come here to look at it. It then becomes important to create the infrastructure for them to come. At the moment, we have loads of single-track roads, which are terrible. We've got no public toilets anymore because we don't have any money to pay to keep them open, and we've got very few public services. So we've got a long distance to travel before we can accommodate a significant influx of new visitors. Again, I imagine you know all this very well from back home, where you've experienced significant increases in the number of tourists who want to come to a place. Great if you're in the industry of being able to take something from them in return. Not so great if you have to live with a much greater number of people in your area consuming resources in some way. So the Highlands of Scotland has gone through a pretty seismic change in the last, I don't know exactly how long, I'd guess about 20 years, where if you take the village I live in as an example, more than 50% of the houses in this village are now second homes. So they're owned by people who don't live here full time. I would hazard that the majority of those are people who have retired here. So they have finished a career somewhere else. They've sold up their potentially not very exciting house in a city or town somewhere in England for a comparatively very high sum of money. They can come here, their money goes a very long way. They buy the cottage, the house, the plot of land that they can retire on. And they bring, in many ways, rich and positive changes. They bring different perspectives. in other ways, they bring negatives. They increase housing prices through demand. They're not economically active, potentially, so they're not working. They don't necessarily integrate in the same way. The biggest issue, in my personal experience, and I accept I'm at quite extreme end of the spectrum here, is those incoming people quite often are very outspoken about change. So they selected the area they wanted to retire to because of the way it looks today, the way it is right now. They didn't necessarily sign up for change. They didn't sign up specifically for where I want to go with it. So quite often they become opponents to change, and we now spend a depressingly large amount of time fighting each other over change myself and people like me might want to bring, and change that some people who I've just described might want to stop from happening. So it becomes hugely inefficient, quite divisive, and frankly just slows everything down and leads to compromise. But compromise, in my opinion, not in a good way. We surrender some of our ambition just to get something to happen. So it becomes a kind of watered down, much less valuable outcome. We're not alone. This area is not alone in that problem, and I suspect this country is not alone in that. This must be going on everywhere. I envisage that maybe the government will legislate to address this problem, because it will become so serious where all of our young people are having to leave to go and find jobs somewhere else, and then they don't come back. And we become dormitory settlements to commute to places, bigger cities locally, or we just become retirement settlements. And I mean that in a respectful sense. But that in turn creates a different need for infrastructure and services that we don't necessarily have, and it's not inefficient to deliver here. So we've got these kind of societal problems to address, which are actually, they're kind of in front of all these other issues which we're trying to achieve. So there's value everywhere. There is revenue to be generated from this value, but there's also a huge amount of expenditure required to enable the revenue generation opportunities that I see following.
Welcome to Montana. Because what you spelled out is exactly what we deal with.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, we especially since COVID, May of 2020, we have seen a political migration into Montana, where conservative folks, right of center folks, have left the left coast. The California, Oregon, Washington, where they had people protesting and burning down buildings, and lack of, they've got district attorneys in their legal system that don't, zero bail. They don't have to pay any money to get out. They get arrested and they get out the next, an hour later, right. And then they go back out there to mayhem again, create mayhem. So, and so these people left. Of course, with all the COVID restrictions, Montana's been open for business since May of 2020. I mean, right. Literally, some places said you had to have a mask on, but most people were open and would take you in, and, you could live.
Right.
And so, but we've seen our population increase maybe by 20 or 30%.
Oh, whoa, right.
And now we're a big place.
Yeah.
I don't know what, Tony, we figure out how big we are, larger than Scotland. We're like all the entire UK. We're like multiple times larger,
sure.
including yes. Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So it's a big place, but yeah, we have this issue where, you have people moving in, they're putting stresses on the infrastructure, putting stresses on real estate, driving prices up, where the native, quote unquote natives, the native sons, the children, may not have an opportunity to stay there because home ownership is beyond their reach. Yeah. In the little town I live in, Whitefish, the average home was over $1 million this last year.
Right.
The average home. I don't mean entry level, average, but still. That's where you had to get into it in order to be there.
Amazing.
Well, there's not a whole lot of kids that are making, $700,000, $800,000, $500,000 a year. They can afford to do that.
Sure.
And so, but getting back to the wildlife issue of it too, is that we find people that come into these areas that don't really understand. They want to go up and pet the elk. They want to go pet the bison. And of course, I'm sure you guys hear the national news and all this. Here's a tourist in Yellowstone that just got gored by it. Well, there's just this huge disconnect, and I would assume that you probably have the same problem with these. What's the terminology that I've heard about these people? They call them
white settlers.
That there's a terminology for these people that come up from the south,
okay,
to move up here, that are retired,
Yeah.
or even they've done well off, and they call them. Remember when they were telling us that story? They call them. It's like they're like immigrants or something.
Okay. Yeah.
They've got a terminology. You remember what it was?
Yeah,
Tony?
I don't remember that. I would have, yeah.
Yeah, it's-
Rory might have been telling us.
Yeah.
Probably not a kind description, I'm
Well,
guessing.
it's not.
Yeah.
It's not a terrible. It's not like
No.
some cussing them out or anything like that. But it is. That's what
Yeah.
they are. It's not weekenders, but it's something like that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you say that's going on. But again, at the end of the day, what's going to happen to the wildlife? And we struggle with that too. But we have a totally different system. The wildlife is not owned by the landowner. The access to the wildlife is owned by the landowner, but the wildlife is owned by the people.
Yeah.
And then it's the people's responsibility to have government agencies that manage the wildlife. And it just seems to me like, well, why don't you guys? You want to have real land reform? Make the wildlife the people's asset, and let everybody pay in to manage it.
Yeah.
And manage the entire damn island.
I think it's yeah. It's
I
an
mean,
interesting.
I'm just talking out loud. I know there's a lot of landowners that be like, "Oh, I'd like to shoot you for that," and I get it. But at the same time, if we're going to have these healthy ecosystems, you can't manage them piecemeal. I mean, we have the problem in the United States, especially in Montana, with the grizzly bears. That population has exceeded the carrying capacity of the land, where they've lived in the wilderness for a long time, where we forced them into 150, 200 years ago. And now we're in a situation where they're expanding out, and they're in farms, and they're in small cities and villages and whatnot, and people haven't lived with them for 100 years plus, and they don't know what to do with them, and the government's not teaching anybody how to live with them, and so we're having human-wildlife conflict, and of course the grizzly bears lose every time that goes on. But if we could allow wildlife managers, all of the cards they need in order to do their job right. It's kind of like asking them to manage their bank account with not being able to look at Tuesdays and Thursdays balance.
Sure.
Yet at the end of the month, they better balance it out. You just can't manage ecosystems without being able to manage everything.
And you're right, but there are a few challenges to overcome to get to that point. So the fundamental is, if you ignore what's happening with the new corporate investment in carbon that's changing the landscape. Traditionally, sporting estates are valued by what you can yield from them in a sporting estate. Ignore the built environment, that has a value, but in terms of the physical, how you value 10,000 acres of sporting estate, you would typically look at the number of stags that would, in a 10-year average, and say a portion of value of £40,000 a year. For each one of those, you get in an average. So that system of handing over wildlife is essentially taking away a pretty significant capital value. Don't make the mistake, as many of us do, of assuming that all landowners are immensely wealthy. Some of them aren't. Many of them aren't, in fact. Some of them who are multi-generational, such as myself. I mean, I could never afford to buy this place now because when my grandfather purchased the place, he was obviously in a place in his life where he could afford it, and values were a fraction of what they are today. There's no way I could afford to buy what I've got now. So asking me to surrender a value that's an issue to be overcome. The second thing is that in order to make viable enterprises, and let's be clear, the vast majority of estates, Highland sporting estates, lose quite a lot of money, in fact, 6 figures a year. In order to try and fight those losses as best you can, you try and work with what you've got. And the only really established way of making money from a sporting estate at the moment is to sell sport on it. And that just really keeps some people in employment, pays a few bills, maybe pays for a new vehicle every few years, and that's it. I mean, it's just taking the edge off. It doesn't pay for the oil to heat the big house or any of that stuff. So again, losing the autonomy to generate revenue is a problem. We'd have to reinvent how that's done. In terms of the physical act of managing wildlife cohesively, I think is brilliant. I mean, I think that is the future. It kind of has to be. Politically, that's where the Scottish Government at least is taking us. They don't like landowners. They want to break up large landowners into smaller landowners. They want to put more land in the ownership of communities, which in some examples works fabulously. In others has been a complete disaster. My personal opinion, if there isn't an enterprise at the heart of that community ownership thing that pays the bills, it's unlikely. It's up against it. I'm not saying it can't work, and there'll be examples where it will, but if a community has an enterprise at the heart of a piece of land that it's going to acquire, great, that's the secret. and whether that's development of housing, property, whether it's an actual business, those things is where it can have a driver and sustainability. Taking the entire thing, as some people would advocate, out of private landowners' hands and putting it into the hands of the government or the public, it's a leap of faith into something. I mean, the government, you don't have to look very far to find things that the government has managed badly. Throw in a load of stuff that I might suggest they don't fully understand, they'll make a lot of mistakes and it will hurt. And you might take the view pretty aggressively that try it. You know, let's pull the pin, see what happens. Let's let it rip. But I think the risks of that are pretty huge. So I think gradually, piecemeal, communities will get more control over areas. We're being pushed in a direction of having management plans. It's voluntary at the moment. Anything that's suggested as voluntary will typically become mandatory at some point. So coming up with a management plan of how I would propose to manage my property that I have to exhibit to the local community and they have an opportunity to comment on, that's going to happen. Great as a concept, love it. But then if you go back to the fact of more than 50% of these houses are occupied as second homes, that's going to skew what those people are going to want to happen. I'm generalizing hugely, but I would advocate the majority of those people would not be in favor of change of any form. They very rarely, in my experience, stand up for any positive direction at all. They typically mobilize when they want to stop something from happening, and they put huge amounts of time and effort into it. If you ask them to support something, no, they're not always there. You know, they're absent. So we're pushing ourselves in a dangerous direction if we advocate full-scale community ownership. In a cohesive community that works, it must be the greatest thing that could be, is a sort of democratic process where everyone locally who interacts with a piece of real estate has some stake in it. That's got to be the future. But we can't design that to work everywhere. It's impossible. We're because this is a free country, people can come and go, they're free to buy a house, there's no control. We are going to get communities where it would work brilliantly, communities where it would work extremely badly. Conversely, you've got landowners in some places, public judgment would say, brilliant, they're a good landowner. In others, they're a bad landowner. Doesn't mean anything, it's just a view at the moment. So little by little, the government are bringing in change, and they're using the environment as the sort of vanguard for that change at the moment. So they're starting to ask, there's a consultation at the moment looking for any estate over 3,000 acres, maybe it's bigger than that, maybe it's 3,000 hectares, forgive me, where they are looking for those estates, landowners, to demonstrate what they're doing to address the climate crisis. And that's probably the thin end of the wedge. So that will come in. They'll be looking for, I mean, I'm not that big, so it doesn't matter, but they'll be looking for people with bigger pieces of land to say, well, I'm doing these things. I'm working with the community on this. I'm advocating change here. I'm trying to do sustainable things there. And gradually it will come to a stage where that will be probably licensed. Just as it will to shoot things. Increasingly, if you go hunting in Scandinavia, for example, every year they go out and they drive all the animals in the forest through, they do a count. Then the scientists, I'm not sure they're actually scientists, but people with scientific training will analyze the population and will issue a specific number of licenses each year saying, you people will, there are your number of animals of this type and this type that you'll control each year. Great, again, if it works cohesively and everyone buys in. It's a big transition to go on here, where at the moment, if there's a deer out behind me, I'll go and shoot it and you can't stop me. Conversely, there could be 100 deer behind me and I could not shoot any of them and you can't make me. So there's a big distance to travel, and I wouldn't envy the government to try and address this. Again, there's no silver bullet. Every community is different. Every group of moving parts is different, and things will work in some places and they really won't in others.
Yeah, that's you bring up the point of it seems to me, I've had people tell me that the whole purpose of the government is the breakup of the union and the breakup of the sporting estates. Drive the landowners off the land. Why is that? Why are people saying that to me on the sporting side of things?
So there is a view that sporting estates have, because they manage with autonomy, they have managed aggressively and in some cases not according to regulations. So if you take the grouse moor example, there are some, and there's evidence of it having happened in some places, where landowners and their teams have overstepped. They've killed illegal things that are illegal to kill, and the criticism of those areas is that they're an artificial habitat. They're not representative of what should be there or would be there if they were left unattended. The protection of that is, I'm not advocating any one thing, but that some grouse moors have the most rich diversity of species on them that you could hope to see, because the predators are managed, the habitat's managed in their interest, and we have these amazing sort of bird life and flora and fauna on some grouse moors. Again, it probably comes back to a question of balance, and some people doing it right and some people not. There is a view that a grouse moor today is a disaster from a biodiversity perspective, when viewed as a whole, in that the ground cover is not being allowed to evolve from a primary cover, which is heather, to bracken, to woodland, and so on. It's being held back at its juvenile form, if that makes sense. So it's artificially retained juvenile habitat that's not being allowed to evolve, and that's fighting nature. Now, I don't profess to say one is right or wrong. It's just that's the breeding ground of the hostility, if you like, is that we are managing these areas of habitat for the benefit of very, very few people. They'll conveniently overlook the very large amounts of money that those very, very few people will pay to do what they want to do, what they hope to do and aspire to do on those bits of ground, which in turn generates all sorts of socio and economic factors. They just look at the downside, which is we're smashing things up, we're suppressing it, we're doing bad stuff when we should be stopped. So I think there's blame on both sides. I think grouse moors where they run into trouble any landowner will naturally disengage, will put up walls to try and protect themselves, and under the constant fire, you do kind of batten down hatches and just plough on, and it's much harder to be fully engaged if you're surrounded by people who are hostile to what you're doing. So that's driving the discussion about licensing of killing things like grouse, management of grouse moors. Grouse moors, for whatever reason, in my opinion, grouse moors are not the lowest hanging fruit. I mean, if people who want to stop blood sports, as they call them, from happening, putting down artificial numbers of birds on a piece of ground where they don't exist at the moment, it to me is a much lower hanging piece of fruit. It's much harder case to defend than managing a habitat for the benefit of a species that we value very highly. We are physically, artificially introducing birds to a habitat where they're not currently in, they're not native, and they're there for a very specific purpose.
But let me stop you for a second. So you're saying the red grouse are not native?
No. Sorry, I'm talking about the birds where we introduce birds. We put birds down.
Okay, so you're talking about the
pheasants and partridge.
Pheasant shoots, the partridge shoots.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So to me, they're it's a much more open debate about whether they're legitimate or doing all the right stuff than a grouse moor, because a grouse moor, by its very nature, does a lot of control that has positive impacts. You might happen to not like the overall package, which is fine. That's it's free.
It does seem to me like back to the anti-hunting type of man. So it's real easy to see somebody from an urban interface. That's where they've grown up. You've got this history here where the landowners are. I mean, obviously they have means, even if it's not the means of the Queen of England. But they have serious means compared to the person that's living in a row house in Edinburgh somewhere in the outskirts of town or downtown or wherever it is.
Yeah.
But it seems like that there's that disconnect there, because these people are not going to the grouse moors. They're not going on a deer stalk. They're not going fishing on the River Dee on a beat. So it seems like there needs to be a better. Both sides need to talk, because one can help, the other can support them.
Yeah.
And it just seems like, and then this is a problem we deal with across the world, is that we have so many people that just don't understand, everything's going to, it's going to breed beyond the carrying capacity of the land. You're going to have to manage the red deer no matter what. You're going to have to manage whatever wildlife populations, game populations, whatever, that end up exceeding the carrying capacity of the land. Well, how are you going to do it? So again, that's another aspect to this thing, but probably more important is talking about carbon here a little bit. This country, or Scotland, is this smaller than the state of New Jersey. It's not very big. You mentioned earlier. I'm trying to understand. There's such a push by the government to be carbon neutral, to create all this carbon sequestration schemes and utilize this stuff. How much carbon does this country actually create? I mean, you're not an industrial powerhouse. You don't have huge cities, metropolitan areas. And you're not much of a surface area. So, what is the impetus behind that thought process?
I think you just hit on something which is kind of challenging to the psyche. We Britain, I think more than just Scotland, we want to lead the world in change, in development, in doing the right thing. You could argue we've got a mixed track record of doing that over the years. I think being at the forefront of something is important to us, and you hear this a lot from the affecting of global warming change, saying, we're tiny. What can we really do? We need to tackle the major polluters, the Chinas and things of this world, and that's all well and good. But you've got to start somewhere. You've got to make a stand. You've got to do best practice. I think carbon in some ways relates to energy as well. So it's not just the carbon units themselves, it's renewable energy. So Scotland has the largest wind resource in the UK, in Europe, I beg your pardon. So it's correct that we should harvest that. Are we?
No, we're fine. I'm sorry. I just opened up my lens a little bit more. So
we have the largest wind resource in Europe. It's correct that we harvest that, and we do everything we possibly can to lead the line in doing that, along with our Scandinavian friends. We're trying our best. Carbon, forgive me, I don't know the exact statistics, but the peatland areas that we have in Caithness, for example, I think is the largest peatland area in Europe, and therefore, presumably sequesters the largest amount of carbon of a land type in Europe. So you're quite right to call it, but I think that there is a part of you that wants to do the best we possibly can. There may be an element of the Scottish attempt to justify our economic sustainability. If we end up becoming independent, which if you listen to the political narrative at the moment is a 50-50 probably, whether this country chooses to go it alone. So generating novel and new and interesting ways of generating revenue essentially is we have to explore it to be the fully decarbonised economy, sustainable, a net exporter of power, and hopefully an exemplar way to run a country. Now, if we get to that place, the promised land, and everything's perfect, I don't know what we do then. If we fixed everything, it's all perfect. Then we might go move somewhere else and try again. I don't know, but I think I don't really sign up for the idea that because we can't really make a material change, we shouldn't bother. I think we've got to go full attack, and carbon and renewable energy are the two things we can do at the moment. So we're trying our best.
Well, I just read today was it here that you no longer are going to allow the sale of, in the UK, the sale, or I don't remember it was the US or someplace, but the sale of combustible gas engines, diesel or unleaded engines in the year 2035, 2030.
Yeah.
So is that here then?
Yes.
I read that. So,
yeah, it is. Yeah. So there is of new internal combustion engines running on hydrocarbons. I think hydrogen and electric powered cars are closer than they might be in other places. But we're a fully signed up member to that fan club. We I with some friends we own a electric vehicle leasing and hiring company, and we're ready for a big change, a big transition away from petrol and diesel cars into electric. So we have, again, linked to renewable energy, we need to put in infrastructure so that we can every single person in Scotland can benefit from the fact we produce a load of we will be a net exporter of power soon, and the UK is not far behind.
So I actually have an answer for my first question, though, about, this carbon footprint you guys have, which is minimal compared to most of the rest of the world.
Sure.
I think Scots have got it ingrained in their head that ever since 1700s that you guys need to lead the charge. you're all seem to have pretty big britches. So it's like, it's like, well, we do. A lot of Scots have done a lot of great things around the world when it comes to advancing engineering and all kinds of stuff. So, and of course, we have John Muir, who came here, who actually came to the United States, but he was at the age of 11, so he really didn't really learn a whole lot before he got to the United States. I would not think, since when I was 11, I didn't know anything either. So, but yeah, Tony, did you want to throw a question or two out?
There's 100 things.
Yeah, we could keep rolling on this. So.
No, I think we covered. It's an interesting discussion, and I guess I don't have any more questions. I really don't. I think at some point it becomes almost futile to get into the details of some of this because they're really almost personal. Like I think we hit the major parts, and then it's at some level it's like it's a preference. You just have to say it.
Yeah.
This is my preference.
Yeah.
So rather than try to defend one thing or another or come up with, it's like not a debate necessarily. It's informative. So I feel like you've done a fantastic job. I really enjoyed hearing this part of it. So that was great.
Cool. No, happy. It's funny. I mean, you don't really analyze what you're doing. You're just doing it, and then people keep asking me why are you doing that. I've no idea. I mean, ponds. I make ponds everywhere, and I can't tell you why. I just love ponds. So any hole in the ground I can dig that'll fill up with water, I'm in.
You're not alike. I love ponds too.
Okay, so,
Actually, I built 6 cascading waterfalls from a little pond down to a 16,000-gallon pond next to my house. I built it in sand.
Brilliant.
All rubber, and rock, and water, and trees, and.
But why did you do it?
Because I wanted water. I wanted it close by because water's life.
Yeah, that's a better answer than I had. I just like them.
Yeah, well, I like them too. So.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's difficult. It's difficult to articulate what you really want from life. At the moment, the largest part of it really is just. I think it's the right thing to do. So beavers coming back. I think it's the right thing to do. Lynx the same. Natural regen, fewer livestock on the hill. I mean, you mentioned earlier about the deer. We hold deer up as being the enemy, but we had some sheep go out on the hill last week, and not one of them looked at the ground. They're all looking about this high above the ground, smashing the top off all the regen. Just every single tree got nailed on the top, and they just moved through it like a plague. And I don't have a particular axe to grind against sheep. Sheep are sheep. People like them. They serve a purpose. I've got no interest in them, but it just shows that it's, the deer get a bad rap. We've got too many deer in places, accept that, but everywhere's different. And it's hard work, isn't it? I mean, you come up against people who want to fight.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. It's hard work. And it becomes even more harder as you get more complicated in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the rewilding part of this. In some ways it becomes more complicated, in some cases it may become less.
Sure.
Yeah. Wow.
But you guys have so much division here. I mean, I don't know if you have property ownership division, but you've got all these people that this whole right to roam thing blows my mind. It blows Tony's mind. I mean, it's like, can we go down and take a picture? Oh yeah, go wherever you want. You don't have to ask anybody.
Sure.
And I'm like, well, do they pay a tax for that? Because we pay we pay a state lands fee to go on state lands in the state of Montana. Yeah. Because those lands have to generate income for schools, but the reality is, it's like, okay, well, we wouldn't think about going on somebody's ranch without their permission because they might get shot.
Sure.
But you guys, it's like a free for all.
Yeah, you get used to it. You do, it probably sounds weird, but you do. You do get used to it, and it has a bonus too because it means if you want to go somewhere. So if you own a place, you might resent somebody coming all over it, but actually, if you want to go somewhere, they can. You're free to go as long as you're responsible. The flashpoint is the responsibility. People aren't responsible a lot of the time. They do bad things.
I mean, that gets back to, I think, if I had a question I remember now, and that is, it's a philosophical one in a way, and I don't know if it needs recorded or not, but it's what responsibility does the landowner have to the land and to the people? I mean, if you think about it, it's important. Because we're asking landowners to make judgments all the time, or at least we expect them to, good or bad, depending on who you are.
Yeah.
So as a large landowner or a small one, it really makes a difference.
Sure.
If you just have if you have a town site and a little building, you're largely ineffective as an individual at changing anything around you. But as a large landowner, what responsibility do you have?
Beyond the sort of basic level of liability for risk. That's it.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really. I have to permit responsible access. I cannot inhibit it. And if I provide any kind of service media, if you like, so like a bridge, for example, if I put a footbridge in, if somebody gets hurt on that bridge, it's on me. If there's an obvious risk somewhere on a path where, I don't know, there's a big hole or something that somebody could fall down, it would be on me to put signage up to warn people. But beyond that, there's none.
So what's optimum though, in your view? Like what I'm talking about is what's your responsibility to this planet?
Yeah.
As a landowner, as a large landowner, and many are much larger than you, but you obviously have a deep commitment to a lot of these issues. You can't say the same for other large landowners. They may not feel like they have any. So anyway, I just think it's an interesting thought about it because you're altruistic in a way. Is that just a belief, or do you think everybody should have to be required to care about their neighbor?
It's a really good question. I think, so you do form a judgment of people, of other landowners and what they're doing. I mean, you don't necessarily speak it, but you have a view of whether somebody is doing good or bad stuff. And you find yourself, I think it's natural as a human, to compare yourself against other people and decide if it's favourable or unfavourable. And I guess the line I try to walk is to be as close to the line of doing all the good stuff I possibly can without being, annoying or getting on people's nerves or becoming a spokesperson for something. That's not my bag. If people are free to choose. If they want to do what they want to do, good luck to them. So I would criticize somebody if they did something which was abjectly negative or deliberately negative towards something else. But by and large, I just live and let live. I think I kind of look at it. I can't control what somebody next door is doing. I could try and engage with them and see if they'll change by explaining why I think it's a good idea for them to change. But beyond that, if that doesn't work, it doesn't work. Just accept that I don't have any responsibility when I check out. Whatever's left behind is left behind. As long as I've done my best, that's the bar I would hold myself to. I'm not sure other people would actually worry about it. A lot of people are looking at life, I guess, to get through it, to amass value, to have a good time, maybe. Nothing wrong with any of those things. But yeah, there's no judgment levied, I don't think, when your time's up. Hopefully somebody might say something positive about you after you're gone and say, well, they did all right. Or maybe they won't. Maybe they'll look and think, what the hell was he thinking? What an idiot. He's wrecked the place. Yeah, I guess from an entirely personal perspective, I want to give my children as many possible options when I'm not here. As if they want to be here, let them be here. If they want to go away and move to a city, do something different, good luck to them. Yeah, there'll be no pressure. It would be extremely sad, as I imagine my father would have been sad if I hadn't been interested in taking the place on, to see all of that work wander off to someone new, particularly if it happened while I was still alive. That would be really hard. I'd struggle to imagine somebody else walking around this place, my manor, undoing my stuff, or doing something different or better. Maybe that'd be the worst of all. But yeah, difficult really to sort of articulate. I'm all about progress, and one of my favourite things to do is look at a map, an Ordnance Survey map, every year or so as they produce, and see the physical impact I've had on that map. So to see ponds, trees, landscape adjustment, something that was maybe field is now a bog, something that maybe was a bog is now woodland, those kind of things, that makes me sort of feel like I've made a difference. Rightly or wrongly, I can't say that all the stuff I will have done is for the good. I built roads and things to improve infrastructure. It's just that gives me some satisfaction. I think, well, I've done some stuff.
But that's interesting you say that, because part of what I look at is that humans have been terraforming this planet for a long time. Terraforming it for our best interest, for survival of our species. And what you're saying is basically you're still abiding by that, but you're trying to do it in a natural way or to enhance nature. Probably that's it. Yeah. And so it's interesting you say that, because that's one thing I think what we see in North America with our modern conservation ethos is that we want to see wildlife there. We want to have the birds and the bird feeder. We want to see the deer and the elk and the antelope play and all that stuff. And I think it's inherent in nature, in humans. I mean, we are part of nature. We're part of this planet. And that's my biggest deal is really trying to take those people that live in the cities, those people that are really disconnected from nature, who really don't understand where their food comes from, and trying to get them to a point where they say, hey, this is reality. You have an impact on it. When how many of you go buy a McDonald's Happy Meal, and everybody raises their hand? Well, there's nothing happy about a Happy Meal, right? So it's really interesting that that there is a group of people out there that are willing to listen, and it's not that they're not intelligent or they're bad people. It's just that there's just a level of ignorance, and not in a negative way. I don't mean that. I just mean it that they just don't understand because it's not been presented to them. And thus, that's the importance of these types of projects, so that we can say, hey, this is reality on the ground. Like it or not, this is what people eat animals, all right? Whether they go out and source them themselves locally or they get them from a butcher, who got it from, a packing house, who bought it from a shipper who brought it in from the ranch. But the people don't get that. So it's real important, I think, to get those stories out and let them understand. And this has been great. This has been awesome.
Are you seeing an increase of the rewilder group? And I'll be unfair a little bit to them and put them in a group. Who are maybe going to be demanding more wild game meat over what they do eat. They don't want to get rid of it altogether, but they're saying, hey, like this is in America's happening. It's like, wait a minute. There's an alternative to beef, and it's a deer.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this, and it's a little bit unnerving in that we have a lot of people who are now going to be involved in killing animals, which means they also get to talk about it and have an influence over it. Are you seeing any of that here, where it's like, hey, wait a minute, I don't want to buy a cow, but I sure will eat that stag.
Yeah.
And I want to kill it myself.
Difficult to say I've seen it. I think there's an acceptance with the Highland estate that deer are part of it. So anyone who wants to do rewilding on an estate up here has to get right involved with the deer and eat it and shoot it all in. So I think it'd be kind of funny if they didn't. It would be a difficult line to walk if they did all that, but they didn't want to get their hands dirty by getting stuck in. So, but. Will it get to the point where they'll become more focused on the product of it? I don't know. It might just be a line to get over. The big test, I think, that rewilding as a concept or as a movement has to achieve is this alternative economy that we forecast as being a product of rewilding. That has to be tested and proven, and it's not yet. And that's the big risk, because I could sit here all day long and say the economy locally will evolve to adapt into catering for people that want to go for a stalk with a camera rather than a rifle, or nature-based economy, all that stuff. Until it actually happens, it's just a concept, and I believe it. I mean, I believe it will happen, but there will be casualties, and there'll be exceptions to that rule, and there'll be places that go backwards before they come forwards.
Maybe that's why you want to be first.
Maybe
because not everyone can be that.
No,
not
absolutely.
Everybody can be the rewilding sort of economy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I agree.
Maybe that's part of that.
Maybe. Yeah,
but again, in rewilding and to have that economy, I'm a marketing guy. Okay, so like I said earlier, we've got Yellowstone. I mean, we've got Glacier National Park. We've got all these ungulates and predators and whatnot. I mean, we have, we can see numerous animals, and of course these are spectacular sites. But when I was talking to David Belhari, I'm like, well, okay, but if you want to have these tourists come up into these areas, what I see here, if you just let the heather go rank and you lose biodiversity, because science proves that you lose a large portion, upwards of 50% of the biodiversity, what do you have? And now he couldn't explain to me what we have. Oh, well, they're just going to want to come look at this. I said, why the hell would I want to come look at this? There's nothing for me to look at. Now, what you've said is like, hey, what if we bring some moose in? You're not going to see the lynx, but you have some moose in, and you got a managed population of ungulates there. You can see beavers. If that's what people that want to come to Scottish Highlands to see beavers and moose and things like that, that's great. It'll be much harder to see predators, like we have with the wolves in Yellowstone. I mean, we have these big landscapes where they live in, and you can see them from time to time because in many cases they've become habituated to humans in places like that. I mean, there's a steady stream of RVs and campers going all through Yellowstone all summer long.
Yeah.
Which is no different than kind of Kruger National Park, to the point where the lions now have become so habituated to humans that they actually utilize the lines of safari cars with 30 people in each one of them to run prey species use them as literally as fences and corrals to kill them right there on there, which of course that's the ultimate for a photo safari.
Yeah.
Seeing the predator kill the prey. We all want to see that, right? It's like Roman times. But that's a fact of life. So, that's one of the things. It's good that you were able to explain, hey, it's a long process. And we want to have this ecosystem be healthy, and we want to see this biodiversity. But the only way you're going to make it attractive in a marketing sense is that it's going to have some pretty big iconic things that come in with it. You're going to have to bring some bears, and you're going to have to bring some other things in there that people can see. And it may not be, and maybe it needs to be a stag that they see, maybe majestic stags, and things like that.
I mean, that's the thing we've talked about. Even it's like not seeing stags. It's like such a bizarre thing. Everybody tells us, and I've always told Scotland, they're all over. There's so many stags, so many animals. It's like.
Have you been here when it's been cold?
Not yet.
No, that's the big. So I mean, in a few weeks. Well, I mean, we're overdue. It should be cold already. That'll really bring them in then in a big way, and that's when you see them beside the A9 in the hundreds and things. So it's still really mild. They're still all up the hill or in the forest.
Sure.
All right, I'm about out of storage on my card, so an hour and 20 minutes into this card. So
Cool.
I have to say, you are the longest interview we've had on this project so far, and it's been great. So we really appreciate it.
Not at all. Well, I hope I've done something of some value, maybe. But
it's been great.
Waffling on for ages, I could do that.
Well, like I said, we have lots of stuff to do here. So
And not being offended by the questions. I mean, this is a lot of personal, in some ways, stuff. You spend your life thinking about these things, and I feel connected to it all too. So,
thanks for listening. You can find this podcast wherever great podcasts live, including on the Shepherds of Wildlife Society website at shepherdsofwildlife.org. Please tell a friend, and let's save wildlife together.